Diversity in responses, I'm deliberately using different tools today, either images or songs and stories and YouTube, just to show you how we all get information from different aspects of things and how that all supports our identity and how we choose to be leaders. So call me on stuff. If it doesn't make sense, ask questions, ask lots of questions, and let's get started, Karen, if we could.
Those of us that are continuing our oral history are blessed. What we shared, that was told from way back.
We were part of the ecosystem. We were not masters of it.
You know, after we grow up from our biological mothers, the earth becomes our caregiver. Everything that we need is there.
Well, we were raised to believe that everything has a spirit, and that everything around us is alive and has a purpose.
The spirit of the land and our spirit. You can't separate land and people.
In Treaty 7 territory, I'm accepted, I'm something, and I'm with my people.
We honor our ancestors by acknowledging Treaty 7 territory. We acknowledge the Treaty 7 nations, the Piikani First Nation, the Siksika First Nation, the Kainai First Nation, the Stoney Nakoda First Nations, and the Tsuut'ina First Nation. We acknowledge the ancestral territory of the Siksikaitsitapi, the Blackfoot Confederacy, and the home of Métis Region number 3.
I'm a big believer of having the people use their own voice to tell their own story. And I could not do a significant land acknowledgement as wonderful as that is. So that's the Calgary Foundation. And it was played at National Child Day, something I participated in last year. So I wanted to bring that to your attention and show how they told a story in a very different way than perhaps other people may tell a story. So I had to do this. I had to do this. One of the aspects when I did all of the things that are going on in the world today. And I said to Karen, did you ever think that when the ball dropped on New Year's Eve on December 31st, that 2020 was going to look like this? I think people had hints of it. People had hints of systemic racism. People had hints of certain things, but holy smokes, talk about Godsmack, here we go, right? Look at all the things that have come out that has forced that to bring diversity to the table. COVID, I had to put class of 2020 because my 18-year-old is very bitter. He doesn't get a graph. Making America good again, right? Missing and murdered Indigenous women, LGBT rights, climate change. All of those things are requiring a leadership response, but there isn't one response. There are diverse responses. How do we integrate those diverse responses to go forward? That is the challenge that we're trying to mitigate. But how do we do that? Well, I'm going to use some resources today. I went to an ASA, which is the Alberta Association of Immigrant Serving Organizations, and they had this great tool called the Social Identity Wheel. So I'm going to show you that. I'm going to talk to you about my family of origin. I'm going to show you some movies, clips, not full movies because we got an hour. Some other pictures, some music, and some LinkedIn resources. Because right now, diversity and inclusion is the hot topic. But do we know how to do it? And are we being reactionary or are we responding? There's a difference between reaction and responding. So let's go after that identity wheel. I really want you to take this identity wheel. I am working with newcomer youth. We often ask them, how do they identify themselves? And some will say, well, I'm emo, well, I'm a jock, or I'm this, or I'm that. What I liked about this resource is that it really talked about and it built upon what my colleagues have been talking about through collaborative change in terms of gender. But I really wanted you to take a look at how everything intersects: gender, socioeconomic status, race, ethnicity, age. What identities do you think most about? What identities do you think least about? And more importantly, how do these all intersect and either complement or take away from your leadership abilities?
Okay.
So we're looking at all these different identities, and what some of the management aspects that I was looking at, the HR aspects we're looking at, they're trying to develop policies to kind of like make everything even, try to minimize all of these things. And sometimes best things is not to minimize, it's to expand. So let me tell you, let's build on that just a little bit. So why do I feel so strongly about intersection and identities and diversity? Well, this is why I feel that. I am a born and raised native Calgarian. My parents immigrated to Canada in 1964. My mom came in February, winter. She still complains about winter. I look at her and said, you could have immigrated anywhere. You picked Canada, February, in winter. That was my mom. She came over as a nanny. She was one of the first wave of people from the Caribbean to come over as nannies. My father, both my parents are from Jamaica, by the way. My father was Jamaican, participated in World War II for the British Army, and he came over when he was done because my aunt and uncle were here. And I was born in the late 60s. So if you think Calgary was a diverse community in the late 60s, let me explain to you, not so much. Not so much. I grew up in a part of Calgary that was called the Italian neighborhood. And my favorite and best friend was Frankie Bellata, because we learned that people of Italian descent weren't welcome in certain other parts of the city, and people of Black descent were not welcome. So we all lived together until my mom moved us way down into the Southeast. And at that time, when I went to school, I was the only color anything in my whole elementary school. So walking from my housing project to school was a 3.5, 4-block walk. There were days where that was the longest walk of my entire life. And there were days where that was the shortest walk of my entire life. My family is multicultural, multi-diverse, multi-ethnicities. So my godparents are the people that took my mom in when she immigrated to Canada. I have an aunt that's half Asian and half Jamaican. I have individuals from German descent. So I had no idea that this was a problem for anybody. I had no idea that people didn't like each other because of the color of their skin until I started grade 1. I had lived with diversity and inclusion my entire life. I grew and knew and learned different cultures, different aspects of things my entire life. But nobody wanted anything standardized until I went to school. That was the clash. I didn't understand what the big deal was. And I still don't. I do, but I'm just saying. I have 2 children. So taking my identity even further, my oldest son is Indigenous and white, adopted. My youngest son is half Black and half white, adopted. Their father is Métis and Scottish, and me. So I always make fun. My kids always make fun. This is like the UN in our house. Like, why can't people just come to our house and learn how to do diversity and inclusion? Why can't people just come and just learn that this is not such a terrible thing, that this is not such a horrible thing? Why are people trying to make us all look the same when we're not? That we should learn from each other. And then my kids make inappropriate jokes like, I'm salt, you're pepper, we're a set. And they go out and they say that. And I'm like, this is horrifying. But I need to tell you that with Black Lives Matter, it has caused a different type of conversation in my house. And I don't want to speak on behalf of that movement because I feel that as a parent and not as an academic. And it takes me back to those very long walks that I had to take sometimes in grade 1. So let's play this video because this is how I feel right now.
There we go. Next white son of a bitch that opens his mouth, I'll smash his goddamn teeth in.
You can't do that, Jack.
I'm supposed to just let this go on.
These men have to live with themselves.
I have to live with myself, too. Right now, I'm living a sermon out there.
You don't matter now, Jack. You're in this thing. You don't have a right to pull out from the backing of people that believe in you, that respect you, that need you. If you fight, they won't say that Chapman forced you to. They'll say that you're in over your head, that you don't belong here.
Do you know what it's like having somebody do this to you?
No. No. You do. You're the one living the sermon in the wilderness. 40 days. All of it. Only you.
Goddamn thing I can do about it.
Of course there is. You can get out there and hit. You can get on base and score. You can win this game for us. We need you. Everybody needs you. You're medicine, Jack.
I played that at a partnership group with a bunch of settlement, justice, educators, counseling agencies. And I said, sometimes that's how our kids feel. That frustration, that overwhelmingness, that expectation to represent. So if we go back to the next slide and we look at that intersectionality, Jackie Robinson, in reading, just wanted to be a baseball player. That was his identity. He just wanted to be a baseball player. But other people brought other identities to his attention, his race, his gender. What I really encourage people to do is, and what I noticed in my research in management, is that everything came from North America. Absolutely everything had a North American perspective to things, and a North American, this is how you do diversity and inclusion. This is how you do diversity and inclusion. But no one looked outside of North America. And I am encouraging you to look outside of traditional management and to look outside of North America. This individual is a Croatian Protestant theologian. And talking about identity and otherness and how to reconcile that. Now, I put this on because this is a book I want to read, right? When I did my master's, I deliberately looked for non-North American resources. I deliberately looked at Europe. I had some coworkers that were from Serbia, so I deliberately asked them for stuff. Diversity and inclusion and that aspect of learning through identities, you need to go outside of North America as well as look inside North America to reflect the world that you live in. Because sometimes it's just too safe to stay with what you know. And that's what I'm encouraging you to do. So let's build on that a little bit more. Here's why it's important to look outside of North America. I looked on some of these LinkedIn resources lately, and there's an article, and for some reason, my 52-year-old brain does not want to remember what the article is. But I'll get it for you next time. But what it is that it's racist to assume that everyone from the same ethnocultural group get along. It was brilliant, absolutely brilliant. When I wanted to understand the Palestinian and the Israeli conflict, who did I ask? I asked someone from Palestine and I asked someone from Israel. When I wanted to understand the Serbian-Bosnia conflict, I asked someone from Serbia. I asked someone from Bosnia. I needed to understand that aspect of things. But you need to understand that people, particularly diverse leaders, often have to navigate two worlds. When I work with newcomer youth who were involved in gang activity, they often talked about how there was one world at home and one world at school. How they acted at home wasn't the same as how they acted at school. And when I talk to workers, they say how I act at home is different than how I act with work. And they're constantly riding that divide. It's a constant balance of how to do that, because they feel that they must do that they must change who they are depending on what environment that they're in. So Ron Green, he is a Black police officer, U.S. in security, and he has an article, look it up, being Black and Blue. How do I do this now? I recognize the system that I'm in, but this is also what I am. He identifies himself as this, but other people identify him as this. Another article that I would actually recommend to you, 2020, the year we could not breathe. Brilliant article, again from LinkedIn, talked about COVID, talked about Black Lives Matter, talked about LGBT rights, and how it's this whole year is about not being able to breathe, not being able to understand where to go. I said to Karen that one of the things I said in my paper was, the world is looking for a leader. The world is looking to be something. So you have a far right because someone can identify with the far right. You have a far left because someone can identify with the far left. You have an environmental because someone can identify with an environmental. People are trying to figure out that they must be something, either or. But how come we don't teach that you can be and? In our homes, in our communities, in our organizations. People who want to be both are called sellouts. People who want to be both are called, you don't have strong principles. Why can you not be an and? Candace Owens is another one where shows that paradox. She is a Black female Republican who believes the Black Lives Matter movement is a joke. She has said openly that we keep elevating criminals to martyr status, and that is not helpful. But she is Black and she is female. She's a politician. Check, check, check. Checks all the diversity boxes from HR people. Check, check, check. But she does not believe the George Floyd thing should be elevated. How do we learn to have those discourses without resulting into violence or without just shutting off? How can we be and? Now we can move on. This is my youngest son. Although now my oldest son is all upset because you quoted Nate, how can you didn't quote me, and it's not fair, and you love him better, and you love me, and I'm like, oh my gosh, you're 18 and 20, when does this stop? What I need to let you guys know is my youngest son, like I said, both my children are adopted. My youngest son has a disability, a quite pronounced disability. And so he learns things and he sees things in a very different way, and he is my living diversity and inclusion guy. Because what I think makes sense, he just goes left. And sometimes I think if they would have actually interviewed me, because you have to be interviewed to be an adoptive parent, I have said many times that if I had teenagers first, I would never have children because I have no idea what I'm doing. Like, not a clue. Then every once in a while, these two boys, when I don't think they're listening to me, say something so profound that I'm like, huh, that's all me. Nothing to do with me. Nothing to do with me. But my son, my youngest son, half Black and half white, when someone asked him the difference between all lives matter and Black lives matter, this was his response. If you have 5 children and one of them gets stung by a bee, you don't give them all Band-Aids. And I went, holy smokes. The kid who drives me bananas actually said something more profound than a lot of the politicians I've heard in the last couple of weeks. Isn't that cool? All right, so I'm going to tell you what Dominic said, my oldest, and he's not here, and it's not on the slide, but I'm going to tell you anyway. My Indigenous son who's older, he said, you know what? Sometimes it's just easier to be the stereotype because people keep telling you what you are. They keep saying what you are. They keep telling you what the potential is, and you fight against it so much that you just get tired and you just do it. Dominic Turner, June 2020. Please tell him I actually mentioned his name. Okay? You saw what my kid said. You saw what my youngest said. And his interpretation and his aspect of how he explains Black Lives Matter. Profound. You heard what my oldest son said. Someone of Indigenous background, he said, you know what? Sometimes it's just easier to play the stereotype. Sometimes it's just easier. But I've always told my kids that how you start your life is not how you end it. Don't let anyone define how you start to be your endpoint. How do you bring your ethnicities to the table? And let me tell you, we bring it. When my oldest son was adopted, we had a smudge in our house. My Jamaican mother is like, I don't understand the point of this. Why are we having a sponge? What's the point? Like, why is there a smoke? Why is something on fire? Mom, be respectful. It's like an honoring service. Okay, I get it. I get it. My mother of Jamaican descent, before I had children, time out. What? That is the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard. That's a white people thing. No one does time out. That's just ridiculous. I have children. All of a sudden, time out is valid. What is it? So what do we need to do? Many of the kids that I worked with, and again, I worked with high-risk youth who are newcomers to Canada, and they said in the falsehood of saying, we all look the same and we all believe we're all the same, they said, for the love of God, I wish someone would just acknowledge what I looked like and ask me questions. They wanted to be seen. They wanted it named. And the worst thing you can ever see is I don't see color. And I always give, if we were in an interactive environment right now, I'd give you a pack of crayons and I'd say, hey, take two. What two colors would you work with? And no one ever wants to work with just two colors. Everyone wants to work with all of them. And that's the point, the diversity and inclusion aspect. Ask questions. For the love of God, if you don't know, ask. That's what my boys say to me all the time. When we all go out together, you should see what people are trying to figure out, how we're all related. You can see it on people's faces. You can see it. It also bothers me that in certain places, because my kids both play hockey, there are certain places that when we go into a store, one will get followed and one will not, or how they'll get followed. So how do we talk about that at home? How do we not talk about that at home? We talk about all of this stuff at home because they are my living diversity barometer. Look for perspectives. Look for responses to leadership. HR, diversity, inclusion policies, social justice. There's a difference between equality and equity. Look for all of these definitions that are not North American. We are missing a whole whack of stuff that can actually add to the conversation. But right now, we're just focusing on that. And what I learned big time and what I learned the hard way is when I was explaining certain things to some of our newcomer youth, they said, your definition of feminism doesn't match mine. Your definition of this academic aspect of institutionalized racism doesn't match mine. So then I just asked them. I would just ask them and use the language that responded well to them. Cultural competency is something that people talk about a lot. I always say that I am not a culturally competent person. I'm a culturally responsive person. I can respond to someone's culture. I am not competent. I'm not competent in my own culture. Why would I be competent in anybody? It's not enough. This woman, look her up. Shirley Chisholm, American Congresswoman. If they don't give you a seat at the table, bring a folding chair. Bring the concept of identity into work. Do not leave it at home. That's been the mistake. In our belief that we wanted to create equal and harmonious workplaces, we forgot that this is part of the equal and harmonious workplace. So if we bring to the next slide, and the most important part of that is that having a seat at the table isn't enough. It just isn't, right? You need to give them, we need to get our seat first. We need to come to the table first, and then that's where the work is. And the work is uncomfortable, and the work is sometimes messy, and the work actually is fun. I don't know why we all think this is such a scary thing. Come to my house. You want to see race relations? You want to see diversity? Come to the table. When my LGBT friends and my kids come, and my aunt with an Asian background, come and see how this is. And why did we put a label that this is scary? Because we've been afraid. I always feel my identity is to end on a high note. I play this video for newcomer youth. I play this video once where they don't see the images, because I actually asked them, is this a Black person singing or a white person singing? And then I show them the lyrics and say, what do you think they're trying to say? And then I show them the video. Thank you for inviting me. Like I said, I told Karen, I have to clean up my language if I'm doing presentations on the internet. But I thank you for the opportunity to share and even start having these conversations. It's time to go, right? I look at my boys, it's time to go. This is a perfect time. It's always been the perfect time. We didn't need to have what's happened in 2020 to start. But what can we do for you? What can we help with that aspect? How do we have diversity and inclusion? How do we take what we try to do at home and bring it forward? We are not perfect. We are messy. We are beyond messy in our house. but the mess is the fun part.